This is Beckah.
And this is Leigh.
And this is File 741. We have a very exciting episode for you today. We are here with R. Alan Brooks, who is the writer of The Burning Metronome. He also has a podcast called Motherfucker in a Cape, which we'll talk about a little later. But we are here to interview him about his comics. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks. We're so glad to have you. So why don't you go ahead and ask our first question, Leigh?
Sure, no problem. Okay, I like the setup of this comic. Each chapter had a dramatic moment, and it began to capture our attention, and gave it only a bit of information about each main plot of the story and its characters. It seemed to focus on the humans and the interactions with the main characters, and how they benefit from these interactions. At first I thought it was more about the humans' perspectives, and that they would be more part of the narrative. Was that your intention when telling the story?
Yeah, I was thinking it would be interesting to examine humanity from the outside. So by using characters who are not quite human, but who are thrust into human existence, it became a good way to just look at it from an outside eye. I find that so much of storytelling, particularly if you're trying to get down to humanity and what things mean, it's helpful to be able to look at it from this different perspective. The Twilight Zone dude, Rod Serling, who I often quote, he said, okay, so really quick, he always wrote things about like war or sexism or if there was no Twilight Zone yet, he was just writing things about racism, just all that kind of stuff. And he was always getting censored. And in fact, when he got censored, he would go to the news and be like, I tried to write about racism, but they censored me. So they called him the angry young man of television for years. So basically after 12 years of that, he got tired of always fighting that fight. And he kind of figured that, if I use sci-fi or fantasy, I can tell these stories. He wasn't even a fan of either. And so his quote years later was, if I talk about Democrats and Republicans, I get censored. If I talk about Martians, I don't. And that was kind of one of the approaches that I wanted to take in writing this story.
That's a great comparison. I didn't even think about the Twilight Zone, but yeah, that's totally, this would fit in that world most definitely.
Oh, well, thanks.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I have a secret theory that I'm him reincarnated. Listen, there's this proof, okay? So he died a month and a half before I was born in the same town that I was born in, Ithaca, New York. And
Interesting.
His first name is Rod, and my first name is Rodney.
I'd buy it.
Yeah.
Totally.
That's all you got.
Yeah,
that's
there you
all
go.
need.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the Twilight Zone, and that's
Me
also
too.
why I love science fiction, is that being able to examine humanity
Right on.
from a different perspective, I think you can definitely make more and more honest commentary than you can.
Yeah, I think the key with that is that it removes the emotional charge, right? Like, if I say this is what's wrong with you, then immediately you feel like indicted. But if I can take it away from you and let you look at it from a distance, then you can see kind of more clearly the thing that's wrong and incorporate it into your life. And I think fiction at its highest does that very well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's brilliant.
I had a side question, actually, because each chapter begins with a quote. Did you have those quotes in mind as you were writing each chapter, or did you have to find a quote to fit?
Well, the quote thing, the first chapter, which was about police brutality, my mother emailed me her response to it, and the first quote is her. It's my mother.
Wow.
Yeah, she has a different last name than me, so people don't know. But
Yeah.
and so I liked what she said so much. I asked her if I could use it as a quote in the book, and then I decided, it'd be cool to use these other quotes, And so I typically write the chapter and then search for or think of a quote that sort of summarizes the sentiment of what I wanted in that chapter.
Cool. That's really
awesome.
interesting. So, since we were talking about science fiction, the plot feels to me like mythical creatures kind of meets an alien invasion, sort of H.P. Lovecraft meets American Gods. So, like you said, your inspiration was sort of Twilight Zone based on humanity kind of thing. Was there anything else that made you choose this specific type of story to tell?
Yeah. I think for the Burning Metronome in particular, I really wanted. I think at this time in history, for me as an artist, it feels. For me personally, it feels irresponsible to not create art that's saying something about how the world is. And I've talked to other people who feel like art is supposed to be an escape, and I think there's some merit to that too. So I'm glad that people create things that are fun, but I want to create something that is fun and engages, on these different levels. And so there's so many things to kind of speak on in the world, but there's a 7th chapter that has been released as a single issue that's not part of the book. And I have one of the characters say this thing that I'm always saying, which is all the isms, racism, sexism, etc., they're all either a failure or a refusal to see the humanity of the other person. And for somebody who refuses to see it, they've already made the decision. You can't help them. But if somebody who's failed to see it, then I feel like art can help that person, because they can see different perspectives that they've never come into contact with directly through the art that we create. And so it was important for me with the Burning Metronome to show a lot of different walks of life.
Well, I think you succeeded.
Oh, thanks.
I agree. I had difficulty deciding who to sympathize with, the humans or the magical beings. Both seem to have their own agendas that weren't with good intentions. Are we meant to empathize with these characters, or is it more of a reflection of our society, which I think you kind of talked about a little bit there?
Oh, it's fine. Yeah, I think no person is all good or all bad, right? Like there are white nationalists who are tremendously loving towards their family. Like Hitler had a girlfriend. He probably wasn't terrible to her. So I think if I'm writing characters and I want them to feel fully realized, then they have to have like some good and some bad, and I think even the duality of calling things good and bad in terms of what motivates us generally is kind of maybe oversimplifying. Like I feel like what really happens is that we all have something that is propelling us forward in any interaction, right? And so like if my mother told me I wasn't smart my entire childhood, then in most of my adult interactions, I'm going to be trying to prove I'm smart, Sure. And so, like, if you think of those kind of things for the characters, then they, when they interact, what each person wants externally and internally, and it creates the interesting dynamic. And then you find yourself being like, well, I relate to that in this character, but damn, that was a dick move. Yeah. Like, why would they do that? But I think that makes it more interesting than just they are all altruistic. I don't know that I've ever met anybody who was like that. So
yeah,
that's true.
There are some people that exist that are like really good humans, but I'm sure at some point they've done something not so great.
Yeah, and it might even be like in a moment, right? Like they do something and then take it back, like, oh man, I didn't mean to do this, but but it's whatever is propelling us inside. Because a lot of it is a matter of what damage we've taken throughout our lives, like what internal need we have, and really, in order to be like good all the time, you have to be whole. And it's almost impossible to make it through this life and remain whole.
Yeah, true. Absolutely. That brings me to Gina, I think. I really loved her as a way for us as humans to feel connected, because she's human and she's kind of caught up in this world. I also loved Wims as kind of the tragic clown. He felt very Shakespearean to me. So do you have a favorite character? A lot of characters die. Is it difficult to say, well, I really love you, but I have to kill you to move the story along?
Let's see, favorite character. I think Walter, actually.
Yeah.
His sense of duty and responsibility. I had like the sixth grader reaction when I said duty.
Duty.
Right. But his sense of responsibility, like trying to do what's right, and even doing wrong things in order to try to figure out to get the right thing done, like, is something I could certainly relate to. And also sort of everybody's expectations on him, where like he's the leader, but they expect him to know everything to do, and they're not trying to figure out things. They feel like he failed them because he didn't know how to do everything perfectly, you know?
Yeah.
Like, that's all stuff that I can relate to in my own life. As far as killing characters, I think I try not to use that as a tool. Like, I don't want it to be something to create drama for a story. I think it's better if it has more meaning if it fits within the story.
Oh, okay.
You know, like, so, you know, there's a way that you can create characters and then just throw them away and people feel betrayed and that kind of thing. But my hope is that if you engage with the character, that their death has some meaning, you know. The artist for the book, Dion Harris, when he was drawing the issue, I guess we're going spoilers, right? It's been like 2 years. Yeah. But when they drew the issue that Wims died in, he was reading the script, and then he was like, yo, man, so I was reading it, and then I got mad. I was like, why you kill Wims? And then I was like, oh, I guess that means it's a good story.
Right? Yeah, that's the reaction I had.
Yeah, he had a very emotional reaction to it. But yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I want it to mean something. It doesn't hurt me per se, but I try not to do it cheaply.
Sure, there's tropes, of course, like fridging, where, you know, a female character is murdered, usually brutally, so that a male character can kind of use that as an impetus for his, you know, vengeance or story. So it's nice to hear that, you know, it's not a decision that you take lightly, not just for shock value. It's really just to... I don't want to say propel the story, but it's meaningful, like you said.
Right.
I also like the point you made about Walter, because it does feel like this group of beings is kind of like a family, you know? And so he's this kind of father figure that everybody's kind of ticked off at because he didn't really do his duty. But yeah, he's definitely an element that holds it all together throughout.
All right. I really like that you keyed in on Gina. Like, not a lot. She didn't do a lot in this book, but I did. It was intentional for her to be like the one consistent human presence that could grow into something else in future books. Yeah. So it's cool that she connected with you in that way.
Yeah, she definitely has some badass moments towards the end of the first volume.
From an artist standpoint, I really appreciated your choice of coloring in this comic. From what I observed, the story has a basic palette, and whenever magic happens, there's a burst of rainbow colors. Whenever something terrifying happens, it turns to reds, and whenever there's an absence of magic, it turns to grays. It's subtle but effective. Was that your intention?
Well, so I should say the color artist was Matt Strackbein.
Okay. Thank you.
And he's a designer in Longmont. He designed the Olympic ski team's uniforms for like 9 years.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Yeah, so he adds this incredible sensibility to the book. So anytime, say like Dion drew somebody in just a t-shirt and then you see like a cool design, Matt did it. If there's like a painting in the background, Matt did it. But he chose a painting that represented the character.
Oh, okay.
So like if you're like when you're in Tammy's house, all the paintings in the background are like trees and things like that. But and it's subtle, and it just adds this richness to the characters. That said, Matt and I did discuss what emotions we wanted to evoke and how to do it in color. So when we first did it, the magic was just like this sort of gold. And I was like, man, I feel like we could do something that strikes a stronger emotional chord for the magic. And I was like, it's almost like we have a good song, but we don't have the chorus yet. You know, like it's all musically sound and everything, but that one thing that people are going to walk away humming, that hasn't happened, you know? And so I kind of pushed him with that and he came back with the rainbow thing and he killed it, you know?
Yeah.
And he has a really good sense. Yeah, I feel like color in comics is basically what a musical score is in movies. So it sets all the emotional tones and gives a different resonance to things, and yeah, Matt is really gifted with that.
I totally agree.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot when we review comics. The choice of color, whether it's a kind of pastel palette or if there's very minimal color, which we've explored things that have that, or if it's very bright, and it definitely does set a tone. And so, yeah, absolutely, the use of color and all of that is very effective in this particular comic.
Right on.
Going back a little bit to the female characters, this comic does feel feminist in that there are multiple female characters, varying ages and races, even if some of them are only in human suits, so to speak. Do you consider yourself a feminist?
So, I am typically reluctant to self-identify, only like with groups, only because definitions change constantly. But as far as I understand feminism to be, yes, definitely. But, you know, there's like first wave feminism, then there's like all these different subgenres, and then there's womanism and all that kind of stuff. But so that's why it's hard for me to answer it as directly as I would like. But what I will say is that it's important to me to make sure that all my women characters are fully developed characters who have their own agency. So in the second chapter, I think, I don't know, I wrote it a while ago. Yeah. But there's it deals with women's power dynamics. It's the one with Anna who gives the girl the texting.
Yeah.
So because that one specifically dealt with power dynamics between women, I had maybe 7 or 8 women friends read it before I had it drawn, because I don't want to be some dude writing women badly, you know?
Yeah.
And they all gave me their feedback, and most of it was like small stuff. Like I think I had one of the characters saying sis a lot, and like, you know, like sister, and they were like, no, I wouldn't say that. So
yeah.
But in general, the core of the story seemed to resonate in a good way. I mean, even with the main characters, the magical characters, you know, I was thinking about, like, okay, how many of them are dying? Who survives? Is their dying just serving to push somebody? Like, I don't want any of that to happen. But then I thought, oh, well, it's because so many of the main characters are women, and they're men who are dying. You know, like, I had to really think about that stuff, you know? Because I think if you don't think about it, you can just give in to whatever cultural or societal biases there are, you know? So I wanted to be intentional about it. And in many ways, what Gina becomes towards the end of the story is me really thinking about it, you know?
Yeah. Do you think, I guess also when I was reading it, I wasn't sure if the beings that were here in human form, if they were genderless or like had more than one gender and they chose a specific body type, or if they kind of, when they came to this world, they were kind of like, oh no, this is the body that is here, so I'm gonna use this, or like, were they human bodies that then they took over? Now I'm starting to have all these thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, yes.
To all of that, yeah.
No, they did enter human bodies at random. These were humans who were at the point of death. So
right,
they died right when they came into the world.
Yeah. I remember now.
Yeah. But, you know, when it comes to stuff like that, well, first of all, I sort of like the idea of the magic as an undercurrent, right? So, like, I don't really intend, maybe it'll disappoint somebody, but I don't ever intend to go into the magical world that they're from.
Okay.
Because that's not what this story is about. This story is about what we do to each other, and we're just using magic as a lens to look at it through, right? So, I think it's okay for those questions to remain open, like, you know, Anna was a poltergeist. Was a poltergeist male, female? Who knows? You know, doesn't matter, really.
Yeah. And
then it also makes us ask questions about how we relate to these characters based on their human shells. Right. Like, do we see them? Does that make them any more or less of any particular thing? And I think kind of leaving those things open allows room for us to examine how we see each other. You know, because we're all really human, like walking in human shells. Right. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so, yeah. Did I answer all that question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, if there is a volume 2, and it sounds like you're hinting off that there will be, what will be the focus of the next volume? Is it Madu? Is that how you pronounce that?
Madu.
Madu. And then we seem to have lost many of the main characters in this volume. Will their stories be revisited in the next volume, or will we be meeting new characters to focus on instead?
Good questions all. I actually just finished writing volume 2.
Nice!
Ooh.
Yeah, an artist. I have 4 artists working on it.
Oh, cool. You don't have to spoil it all, but like
Yes.
a little bit, maybe.
We were just wondering.
I'm also glad that you guys caught on to like Madu's name. Like, there's a way like with exposition in stories, it can feel very sort of clunky, right? Like when for example, me explaining how they came into human bodies. Like, I think I had it in there, the explanation maybe 5 times, and then I was like, no, this is too much. So I took it back, and maybe now it's just 2 times. But then I'm like, is that enough? You know, because you don't want to like overdo it, but you also don't want people to be confused. So it's an interesting balance to try to strike, right? And so Madu, I was definitely sowing seeds for future stories by mentioning him, and I wondered if it was too subtle, if anybody ever caught it, you know. So it's cool to hear that you guys caught it.
Yeah.
As far as this next story, the next book is actually going to be a flashback book. So it's going to focus on Wims and Anna.
Oh,
Oh,
cool.
okay. That's cool.
Yeah, and so
Extra excited.
nice. Yeah, and this is the first place I've ever said that. So
Nice.
yeah,
Well, you heard it here, folks.
right.
On File 741, Feminine Files.
Exclusively.
Right. So yeah, it's set like a few years before the first book, so you get a little more time with them, but it also gives you details about what's going to happen in the next book. So it all kind of fits together, you know. It just gives you kind of insight.
Nice.
Yeah, and the artists who are lined up for it, one is, well, Dion's coming back to draw one, who was the artist for the first one, Dion Harris, and then Dalen Ogden. She is, do you guys know her?
I don't, but
She's a really talented illustrator in town. She writes and draws a comic called The Liminal. She might be a guest you'll want to talk to.
Yeah.
She's
Yeah, definitely.
very cool, very talented, lots of personality. And then Kashay Whitman, who just got hired by IDW to draw Transformers.
cool.
Yeah, so depending on how taxing that schedule is, she'll be able to get to my chapter. But she read it, and she loves the chapter that I gave her.
Cool.
And so she's really looking forward to doing
Yeah.
it. It's just, you know, we'll see. But she's doing covers and interiors. But they're all artists I'm excited about. And then I am going to draw a chapter.
How
Nice.
exciting.
That's
Yeah.
great.
So I got kickstarted. I mean, I used to draw a lot when I was younger, but I haven't really tried to draw comics since I was like 12. But, so, you know, comic book artists are garbage. Mostly what I mean is like, I have one finished graphic novel, but if all the artists that I wrote stories for finish them, I'll have 9, you know. And so like, and this isn't just comic book artists, this is like rappers, this is everybody, every creative person I've ever collaborated with, basically, except for Matt Strackbein. It's like, the insecurity, all the struggles, like, they just sabotage themselves quite a bit, you know. So like, I wrote a script for an artist, and a year later I looked in Google Docs, and I see him all the time. He'd be like, yeah, man, I'm working on it, I'm ready. And then a year later I look in Google Docs, he hadn't even opened it in a year, you know. So I decided that I would draw that one. That's a whole nother book that I'll tell you guys about in a little bit. But but it got me drawing. So I started that in November, and I've drawn maybe 11 pages, and it's coming out way better than I thought it would.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So I'm going to do a Burning Metronome chapter.
That's so cool.
Really exciting. Yeah,
That
we're
is exciting.
very much looking forward to that.
So you see it as an ongoing series. Do you see like a limited number of volumes already, or are you just going to see where the story takes you?
I think the latter. I think I'll kind of know when it's done. I mean, right now I'm feeling like maybe one more volume after this to kind of close it out. But I do like being with these characters and seeing like how they interact with human beings. Like the human being stories are the ones that are most interesting to me. And I think that even shows because, like, I went on Goodreads and found our book on there. And, I was bracing myself because people are mean on the internet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we got, like, a 4.5 out of 5 stars.
Nice.
Yeah,
That's
and I was like,
great.
wow. And, the comments, like, they weren't even my mom. I was like, these are people I don't know. But one person said that he liked the human stories more and that the explorer stuff, the alien stuff, was, like, a little wacky. But... which was fine, But I think, I mean, the human stuff is definitely more important to me. So he probably felt that when he was reading it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But,
Cool.
yeah.
So was comics the form you always wanted to write or express yourself in, or do you write prose as well? Do you write poetry? Is there kind of other creative outlets that you use?
Well, so I only decided I wanted to write comics like maybe 3 or 4 years ago. But I've always read comics since I was like 5. My father bought me The Flash when I was 5 because he wanted me to read. But no, most of my life I've been rapping. I went on a couple tours and stuff like that. And I still rap twice a month at Ophelia's with the jazz
cool.
band.
Yeah.
And so I was writing songs for most of my life. And this sort of longer narrative style, I had to really figure out how to do it, But yeah, I've always, like, comics were my first love. I loved comics before I even knew what hip-hop was, And I used to, I talk about this on my podcast, but I used to go to comic conventions when I was a kid, and it'd be like 200 people at the most, and basically me and white dudes in their 40s,
Yeah.
Like, but it's amazing to see how it's all grown and how many different voices have emerged. It's a really beautiful thing. I love it. Like, I love how much this culture has been embraced and how it's diversified in all these beautiful ways. Like, the people who want the old stuff can still get the old stuff. The people who want new voices can get new things. Like, it's really cool.
Yeah, it's really cool
Yeah.
at the library when kids come in and their parents are like, they don't really like reading, and I'm like, well, here are all these comics that it gets them reading, and then that it activates that part of your brain that synthesizes image and word at the same time, and then it really kind of snowballs from there. And there's so much great stuff for boys and girls and gender non-conforming kids. Like, you can find anything,
Right.
And it's kind of the same with YA fiction. I was talking to somebody recently, like, when I was a kid, I feel like I went from, like, kids chapter books to, like, adult chapter books. I don't remember YA being much of a thing, and now there's, like, all of these queer characters and people of color who are writing, and people can see themselves reflected more. There's, we have a very much further to go with that, but people like you are making it better, so thanks.
Thank you. I was going to say, there's this educator, I think she's a doctor, Dr. Meryl Jaffe, who literally wrote the book on how comics are valuable in educational settings. One thing she talked about was sort of like basic, I'm going to say problem solving. I know it's not what she said. But, so you have, like, panels, and you have the gutters in between the panels, right? And so from panel to panel, since it's only a snapshot of action, it means that whoever's reading it has to be able to intuit what happened in between those two panels.
Right.
Right, so that helps with reading comprehension. Then also, for struggling readers, they can read a comic and get the art part of the story, and then go back and read it again, and they'll start to comprehend the words more because they kind of know what's happening.
Yeah, they contextualize it.
Yeah, so that helps them along. And so she wrote a whole book on that kind of stuff, and I was like, oh, this is good.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, and from an elementary school teacher's point of view, that I would totally agree. I use comics a lot in my classroom.
Nice.
I always tell the kids that it's like reading a movie.
Yeah.
Because it's basically like a storyboard.
It's true.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Well, if you don't mind, I want to transition just a little bit and talk to you about your podcast.
Cool.
So you have this podcast, Motherfucker in a Cape, which is awesome. You interview all sorts of really interesting people. So I wanted to ask what inspired you to start that project, and do you feel your purpose in that work is similar to your purpose in writing The Burning Metronome?
These are good questions again. All right, so you guys know about Dink?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so Denver Independent Comics Expo. They have an award show every year. I've hosted it every year. So the first year I hosted it, there's this guy. Should we wait for that to?
You were just wait for the.
Oh yes,
the
pipes.
pipes.
The
Yeah. Speaking of duty.
Right. Full circle. I like this
little
old
drum
Colorado.
snare.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Public
Wash
health.
your hands.
After using the toilet. All right, so after I hosted the first one.
I'm just gonna leave this all in, so it's
Okay.
good. You can just keep going.
Characters.
Yeah.
Right. After I hosted the first one, this artist in town, Mateo, whose last name I cannot remember, he was a little drunk, and he was like, "Man, you are so funny. Do you have a podcast or anything?" And I was like, "No, but I should." And so it just started me thinking about it, because I was thinking, what are other ways that I can engage with the public on creativity and comics and things that are important to me? So I thought, well, I don't want to hear myself talk for an hour. So maybe if I find interesting guests who have interesting things to say, then it can just be a conversation and we got fun. Mm-hmm. And that's how it's been. I do them live here at Mutiny Information Cafe, but then I also do like one-offs with a handheld recorder. When I meet people, like, I interview Charisma Carpenter from Buffy and Nichelle Nichols from Star Trek.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Like, those were just in the moment, I was like, and then Lisa Berry from Supernatural, which is not a show I watch, but she was very cool. And then I watched the episode she was in after we talked, So like a lot of that, I've been surprised and pleased with how people have embraced it, It is a pain in the ass for people to find it. Like, it's on iTunes and it's on Spotify, but they're like, is motherfucker one word?
Right. Do I spell it out?
Yeah.
Do I put the asterisk?
Yeah. And, so, like, when I tell people the name, they immediately want to hear it, but then they're like, I can't find it, know? But typically, if you type mother space F, it comes up. Yeah. And, but also, it's been cool because it is a way that people can engage, right? So, like, it has opened up other opportunities for me. For example, just having that podcast, like, that's why I got to talk to Nichelle Nichols from Star Trek. She's 85 years old. Mm-hmm. Like, that wouldn't have happened. People have invited me to host things. There's a yoga activism festival called Arise that happens once a year in Loveland, Colorado. And it was because I host a podcast. They asked me to, like, MC their main stage, and it's like 15,000 people.
Cool.
Right?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, so like a lot of cool things have happened from it. And then I've been able to talk to a lot of cool artists and kind of hear their perspective and learn how they work on things and what they think and how they approach art, much like you guys are doing, so it's been very cool for me.
Awesome. Well, thank
Great.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, did you have anything else you wanted to bring up about the podcast or the comic or anything else?
Let's see. Oh, podcast. I think the first episode, maybe it's the second one, was with a sex worker who makes comics.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite episodes.
Ah,
I tell
one of my
people every time I talk about your podcast, I'm like, he has his episode and it's so cool and so interesting, and I love anything that is actively working to destigmatize anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was, good. Yeah, it was a really interesting episode for me. So the book that I'm drawing is called Anguish Garden, and I don't have my elevator pitch for it yet because it's still kind of new.
Sure.
But essentially, it's in the aftermath of a war with aliens. The aliens have figured out a way to infect our environment, and the way that they've infected our environment, when humans give in to the infection, they become members of the alien race. And so this is after the war, but everybody's infected, so people slowly, may change, may not.
Sure.
And so the people who are changing and the remaining aliens are quarantined to an area called Anguish Garden. And the main character, where it starts, her job is to make sure that when people change, they go to Anguish Garden. Mm-hmm. She's like the enforcer in that way. So that's the beginning of it, but of course it has social commentary, but that's kind of rooted in the end, and since I haven't figured out how I want to say it yet,
sure,
just know it's there.
Yeah.
Also, Colorado Sun. Do you guys know about the Colorado Sun?
I've been, following that.
Cool.
Yeah, online.
Well, so I write a comic for them, a weekly comic called What I Miss.
Yeah.
It's about a woman named Myra who's been in a coma for 30 years. So she's a white woman in her 50s. And she talks with her black neighbor in his 20s about life. And the cool thing about her having missed those 30 years is the last president she remembers is Reagan. So she can compare Reagan to the current administration, you know.
Yes.
And so, like, yeah. So there's, like, a lot of cool things where she's sort of rediscovering life, but it allows me a chance to talk about things from a lot of different perspectives. Mm-hmm. And so Corey Redford draws that comic, and she's really talented. She has a book of dicks, which is really funny.
Yeah, I met her recently. I think it was at Dink.
Was it?
I can't remember,
Yeah, she
but
had a table there.
yeah, I was looking at all her drawings. They're so funny.
Yeah,
They're
it's
just
really
great.
funny. So it's not that, just to be clear, that not that just she has a book of dicks.
No, yeah,
she
they're
drew
like
a book of dicks, and it has
the science ones are my favorite.
yeah, it has all different kinds. It has Thanos' stick is in there. Yoda's stick.
Yeah.
Like, but it's all really funny.
But like Darwin is like the evolution of like an erection.
Right.
It's so funny.
Yeah. So she's hilarious.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds awesome. So, when can we expect all of these things to materialize?
It's a tricky thing when it's in artist hands.
Yeah.
I don't think Dink is likely. I'm hoping to get them out, both the newest Burning Metronome and Anguish Garden, by Denver Pop Culture Con this year.
Yes. We were
Yeah.
just discussing the name change.
Yes.
Yeah,
Denver Pop Culture Con.
It's a mouthful.
Yeah.
it is. It is.
Well, I love the title Anguish Garden. That's
I do
very,
too.
Oh,
really
cool.
poetic, and
Yeah.
All right.
I really like
I love
it.
how deep your stuff is too. It
Well, we're
gets me
very,
thinking.
very much looking forward to that. So, where can we find your current stuff?
All right. Burning Metronome is at All Tattered Covers. It is at Mutiny Information Cafe. It's at most local comic shops. I Want More Comics, Mile High Comics. Also, for people who are outside of Colorado, it can be found on theburningmetronome.com. Oh, and then it's broken up into separate issues on Comixology.
Okay.
And
okay.
so those are digital, you know, and then since we've broken into separate issues, this guy did a couple of covers for us, and his name is Sin-Q Smith, and he did like painted covers, and those are really cool.
Yeah.
And so yeah, you can find it in those places, and then you can go on the coloradosun.com and read What I Miss for free, and Mother Space F. You can listen to that for free, and you know, and the other stuff. Yeah, I mean, I've sent artists a schedule, and I've paid a deposit, so we'll see what happens.
There's so much water going on. I don't understand.
Yeah,
This
right.
is
true.
done. And you're on Twitter and Instagram?
Yes. So Twitter, thank you. Twitter at Alan Brooks _ ALAN, 4 letters more better. So when I was a preteen, there was this rapper that I had a crush on. Her name was The Real Roxanne. And I got her autograph, and I told her how to spell my name, and she still spelled it with 2 L's. Anyway.
Crushed your heart?
Yes. And just to show you how long ago that was, years later on MySpace.
Out of MySpace.
Okay, she and I became friends on MySpace, and I told her that story. And she was like, I'm so sorry. Anyway, and then on the gram, I am at the Burning Metronome. Yeah, so that's pretty straightforward.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. We're really glad that we were able to talk with you about your comic and your podcast and all of your awesome stuff that's coming up. Like I said, we are super excited to see all of your new stuff. And please keep in touch. We would love to support you in whatever way we can.
Hey, thank you guys for having me. It was fun. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for being on this. Okay, this has been another exciting episode of File 741. I'm Leigh.
I'm Beckah.
Thank you for listening, and please like us on Facebook or follow us on Instagram and Twitter. You can tune into all of our podcasts on iTunes, Podbean, YouTube, or at thefeminerdfiles.net.